guarantees the representation of women in parliament by designating a minimum of 30% special seats for women. Currently, the number of women in parliament stands at 36.89%. There has also been concrete efforts to increase the number of competent female judges and magistrates in the judiciary, with women comprising 41.2% of the Court of Appeal judges, 55% in the High Court, 48.9% in the resident magistrates courts, and 41.3% in primary courts. The government has taken huge strides in creating a conducive environment for women economic participation. The government continues to address the issues of inclusion of women in the formal economy, and several empowerment funds have been launched giving women access to business capital. Mr. Vice President, the government believes in strong collaborations, partnerships and support of all the stakeholders in pursuit of the realization of human rights. As such, and in compliance with the Paris Principles, the Tanzania Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance continues to play a pivotal role in the realization of human rights and good governance. The chairman and 5 commissioners of the National Human Rights Institutions were appointed in September 2019. The government also values the significant role that civil society organizations play in complementing government's efforts in the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. It is for these reasons the government works to ensure the legal and institutional framework available provide a conducive environment for NGOs to perform their duties. However, as a growing democracy in a complex world, Tanzania is faced with multiple challenges of, among others, money laundering and the proceeds of crime. To address these challenges and in implementing the recommendations by the International Financial Action Task Force on combating the abuse of non-profit organizations, the Parliament amended the Non-Government Act in 2019. The amendments are also aimed at enhancing accountability and transparency through regular activity reports. Mr. Vice President, in conclusion, these are unparalleled times in the United Republic of Tanzania, as we are moving at a tremendous pace to fulfill our development agenda. The government, as the main duty bearer, remains committed to ensuring that civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights are treated at par, and that all Tanzanians fully enjoy these rights without discrimination as enshrined in the Constitution, laws, policies, traditions and culture of our country. Tanzania stands ready to engage with relevant stakeholders on how to further improve efforts of the government towards the promotion and protection of human rights, as well as enhancement of development and of welfare of our people. Mr. Vice President, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, I have the honor of calling His Excellency Andrew Zhirinovsky, the Deputy Foreign Minister of North Macedonia. Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to address you today. Bearing in mind the importance of the UN Human Rights Council as one of the bodies that have a vital function and priority in promoting, respecting, and of course protecting human rights and freedoms, the context is an excellent opportunity to see the results achieved and also the challenges we face. The role of the Council as a body is indisputable, and therefore we support the idea of its efficient and effective functioning in order to timely and adequately address alarming situations of violations and disrespect of human rights and freedoms in order to promote and improve them. Mechanisms that enable it, such as the Universal Periodic Review, the mandates of independent experts and special rapporteurs tend to become more productive, justifying the purpose of their existence. In addition, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has a key role to play in monitoring the situation in countries and regions, as well as providing adequate technical assistance and support to address, mitigate identified shortcomings and disregard for certain freedoms and human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, which is the cornerstone of promoting and protecting human rights by preventing numerous conflicts and suffering of the global population through mediation, peace missions, and of course, agreements. Despite serious achievements on the enormous contribution that the organization has made to humanity, we are still faced with serious challenges and debate on how to deal with them. Namely, Secretary General Guterres called for 2020 to start a decade of action and 2020 to be a year for urgency to act, underline the serious new and modern challenges facing the organization as well as the entire international community. Furthermore, we are witnessing a serious globalization trend that has resulted in global geostrategic tensions and widening the economic gap between developed and undeveloped countries. Serious conflicts that have resulted in migrations and forced displacement of millions of people, terrorist threats and attacks. As a consequence, societies are experiencing a diminished degree of confidence to the population of the authorities and institutions, with a growing trend of populism and nationalistic rhetoric and movements. In addition, the phenomenon of climate change arising from man's disregard of the environment and for the protection and preservation of nature in general results in the continual elemental destruction of our planet. All of this implies the need for a serious approach and defining grave measures of action to stop human war with nature by directing global efforts for a healthy environment as a condition for the enjoyment of human rights and human freedoms. Rapid technological development and digitization, which are not synchronized with the development of mankind and impose new ideologies and trends, also pose a special threat by allowing the development of so-called autonomous weapon systems to lead to the exclusion of the human element in decision-making. Despite global efforts and the pursuit of peace and stability, we are still witnessing numerous conflicts as worrisome situation in certain regions on our planet. Despite allegations of enforced disappearance, extrajudicial executions, restrictions of freedom and of expression and association, Burundi's decision to close the HCR office raised concerns. In Myanmar, 2 years after the horrific violence, the country is facing a new wave of violence, affecting both Rakhine and Rohingya ethnic communities. The human rights situation in Afghanistan is also worrisome, especially in view of the large number of civilian casualties during the presidential elections. In order to achieve a solution to the brutal conflict and sustainable peace, it is necessary to focus on the respect and protection of human rights with an emphasis of women. Continued military escalations in Syria have resulted in frightening numbers of civilian casualties, of which a large percentage are children, multiply attacks on health facilities and their destruction, as well as attacks on schools. As a result, a number of displaced persons is steadily increasing. This brief overview of the human rights situation in only a few countries is indicative of the international community's commitment to mobilize collective efforts to prevent new conflicts, not to expand and escalate existing ones, and to end impunity and to sanction all human rights violations and freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, this year we are also celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and its platform for action. In this context, there is a need to strengthen efforts to synchronize economic, political and social system from an equality perspective. It is necessary to create conditions for equal participations of women in the decision-making process in all areas of social functioning, to overcome the gap of unequal treatment of the labor market and to offer equal conditions for work and pay, as well as to protect women from all forms of discrimination and gender-based violence. The 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on the participation of women in peacekeeping missions is another marking the highlights of the role of women. Ladies and gentlemen, now let me briefly touch upon the current development in my country. In a stark contrast to the previous period, the new government, since 2017, has made a U-turn on its democratic and human rights credentials, notably by reforms in judiciary, re-establishing democratic control over security and intelligence services, enhancing freedom of expression, improving media landscape, strengthening social cohesion, improving children's and women's rights, and enlarging space for civic activism. After reaching a solution to the name dispute with the Hellenic Republic through the Prespa Treaty, our country has resolutely pursued its strategic priorities. On 11 February, North Macedonia has ratified the North Atlantic Treaty effective upon completion of the last national ratification of the NATO accession protocol by Spain. And it's a matter of days when the country will officially become the 30th NATO member of NATO ally. And NATO membership does not imply only enhanced security, but also provides conditions for the better adherence to principles of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. With regards to the EU integration process, we hope that by the forthcoming European Summit in March this year, a decision will be made to start EU accession talks, which will further strengthen implementation of standards of democracy and human rights already in place. In the meantime, given the current political developments and early parliamentary elections scheduled for April this year, the country remains consistent with its commitment to protect, respect, and promote fundamental human rights and freedom. Like any democratic society, the Macedonian one is not immune to the challenges of corruption, influence on the judicial system, and so on. But we have manifested the strong political will to tackle, sanction, and improve the situation in the country. This is also shown through continued cooperation with the independent human rights bodies and mechanisms, as well as the recent adoption of the Law of Public Prosecutor's Office, which demonstrates a strong will in our country to keep working on reforms in the areas of fighting organized crime and fighting corruption. At the same time, this sends a strong message to the international community demonstrating the political determination of North Macedonia to take the necessary steps in continuing the European course of the country, even during a complex pre-election period. The country's commitment to contributing to global efforts to promote human rights and freedoms is manifested through the 2025-2027 Human Rights Council candidacy bid, and in this context we hope that through your esteemed support we will have the opportunity to contribute constructively to the effective functioning of the Council. Ladies and gentlemen, the serious challenges faced by the international community, especially in light of the three significant anniversaries, oblige us to step up our collective efforts and cooperation to deal with them, of course, in a successful manner. In this context, let me quote Secretary General Guterres: "Yet anniversaries are not about celebrating the past, they are about looking ahead." The duty of each of us is to preserve and maintain peace and stability as a condition for the prosperity of any society. At the heart of every activity, we must have the human aspect as an impetus to tackle contemporary challenges and the suffering of innocent people around the world, and implement adequate protection of all human rights and freedoms by meeting the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The full and equal integration of every individual, especially the youth, in all processes, including decision-making process, is formally and legally guaranteed for under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thus, let us take key steps towards the future, standing firmly in the defense of human rights, using the progress made and past resulted in a strong motive that will show in front of us. In conclusion, let me congratulate Ambassador Elizabeth Tichy-Filsberger on the assumption of the presidency of the Council for the 40th cycle and wish her success in discharging the challenges today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Aurelio Ciucoi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Integration of the Republic of Moldova. Excellency, you have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, so it happens that this year, 2020, is the year of anniversaries. For example, 100 years of multilateralism and 75 years since the creation of the United Nations. Likewise, quite a few are directly related to the advancement of human rights. The members of the Council of Europe will celebrate 70 years since the adoption of its landmark European Convention on Human Rights. Then we will all celebrate the Convention of the Rights of the Child and the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action. It is important to celebrate our common achievements, but even more so, these anniversaries should stand as a reminder that it is our duty to protect and accomplishments and advance new ones so that the generations to come will have reasons to celebrate as well, at least something. We are living in a very challenging time. Today, human rights face more and more challenges, putting our values and belief system to a very serious test. The old culprits, conflict and poverty, compete with new risks posed by climate change, rising inequalities, unchecked development of information technologies and artificial intelligence, mass movement of people, and shrinking space for civil society. Moreover, it is unacceptable that in this day and age, when we speak about the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, to still be affected by the scourge of violence against women and domestic violence. The Republic of Moldova is among the strong believers in the power of collective action, including through the international multilateral institutions that we have created as the Human Rights Council. I take this opportunity to reiterate our support for the High Commissioner and her office and to express appreciation for the consequential work they do on the ground. Dear Mr. President, at the national level, dear Deputy President, at the national level, the Republic of Moldova passes through a sort of awakening with regard to the protection of fundamental human rights and freedoms, as many of the current politicians have had a taste of their own of how is to be persecuted, harassed, or reduced to silence. Now, when we say that the protection and promotion of human rights is at the top of the government's agenda, it is not only because it goes in line with international recommendations. This comes from a deeply internalized fact that without a proper system of human rights protection, each and every one of us becomes vulnerable to abuse in the face of unchecked authority. This comprehension has made it even clearer that we cannot have our rights protected without a truly independent justice system. This is why the Moldovan authorities have embarked with close guidance of the Venice Commission on our courageous overhaul of the system that would ensure its independence, integrity and professionalism in order to restore the trust of every individual in our country that her or his rights will be protected or reinstated by a fair and finally just court of law. Furthermore, the Moldovan government is determined to put in place stronger guarantees for the protection of fundamental freedoms, including freedom of expression and access to information. As an underlying priority for the government's human rights policy is to consolidate the existing mechanism of monitoring and reporting on the implementation of the National Human Rights Action Plan and of the recommendations received through the Universal Periodic Review, special procedures and treaty bodies. And last, but of crucial importance to the advancement of all human rights for all, is the elimination of all forms of violence against women. The government has intensified its efforts towards this objective, especially by preparing the national legal ground for the ratification and implementation of the provisions of Istanbul Convention. We look forward for the Parliament's final vote on the matters. Dear friends, Excellencies, let me now turn to another pressing issue for my country, the human rights situation in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, which, due to being temporarily outside the control of the Moldovan constitutional authorities, has become the breeding ground for unlawfulness and human rights violations perpetrated by the illegal secessionist regime in Transnistrian region of my country. Thus, we would like to use this opportunity to express our deep concern with regard to the grave and systematic violations of fundamental rights and freedoms perpetrated by those who hold effective control over the region. The right to life, liberty and security, the right to life without fear, the freedom of expression and association, the right to a fair trial, right to property, freedom of movement, right to education, right to obtain medical care, the right of conscientious objection to military service, and the right not to be subjected to torture are routinely infringed by so-called authorities in Transnistrian region of my country. The Moldovan government has made it a matter of priority and principle to be addressed through the means at its disposal. The human rights violations perpetrated by those de facto in control and has outdone itself in taking measures that will improve the lives of people living in that very secessionist region of my country. Here, I should mention the decisions with regard to the apostillation of university diplomas, the circulation with neutral license plates for the cars, the inclusion of the region of the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union, which we have, and the visa-free regime with the European Union, the freedom to be registered in business and receive Moldovan identity cards, passports, universal medical care on the territory controlled by the constitutional government are at their disposal. All these improvements were possible due to the determination of the Moldovan authorities to always be guided by the higher purpose to shielding ordinary people from the negative effects of this protracted conflict. Dear friends, my address today is not only a political statement. It is also a call for human rights. It is a call for the lives of Petru Mustea, Mikhail Duaga, Oleg Horzhan, Tatiana Belova, and many others who are still suffering from the actions of the illegal regime in the Transnistrian region. All these cases involve abductions and illegal detention for prolonged periods of time in Comunicado, in abject conditions where the victims are tortured, denied food, medical care and visits from family members or any kind of legal representation. All these as punishment for exercising their fundamental human rights. Thus, we call on the international community to not turn a blind eye to the lives of Petru Muster, Mikhail Duaga, Oleg Horzhan, Tatiana Belova, and the many other victims of violations, the ones we cannot even speak about because of the risks to their safety, and the ones no one even knows about, and those who silently live in fear of becoming themselves subjects of these abuses. We reiterate our call for unrestricted access to places of detention in the region, for the international monitoring mechanism with which the possibility to hold confidential interviews. I would like to take the opportunity to express the Moldovan government's utmost respect and appreciation for the human rights defenders that are relentless in their determination to help the victims and raise awareness about the situation in the region. Distinguished delegates, it is our conviction that in order to ensure the protection of human rights, address individual cases and end the climate of impunity, an effective monitoring mechanism of the situation in the region is urgently needed. It is indispensable and it is critical now. Such a mechanism must provide the ways to hold those responsible for violations accountable. The current OSCE mission to Moldova, unfortunately, is not able at the time being to face such a complex challenge. Thus, we plea for the international community's support in the establishment of this mechanism that, in close coordination with the constitutional authorities of the Republic of Moldova, would ensure the protection of human rights in the region. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Mr. Jeffrey Onyeama, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, I congratulate His Excellency Ms. Elizabeth Tichy-Filsberger, President of the 14th cycle of the Human Rights Council, as well as the other members of the Bureau. I congratulate you all for your election, and in line with extant provisions, your election has entrusted you with a mandate of leading and coordinating the work of the Council for this year 2020. We assure you of Nigeria's support and cooperation as you lead the work of this important body. I also congratulate the 14 member states that were elected into the Human Rights Council during the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I reassure you all of Nigeria's willingness to partner with other member states of the Council in promoting the core mandates of the Council. Mr. Vice President, this session is holding at a time the world is preparing to mark the 25th anniversary of the 4th World Conference on Women and adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. This milestone is pivotal for accelerated realization of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls the world over. It is pertinent to recognize that gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls will make a substantial contribution to the progress and prosperity of nations, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. We must recognize that the achievement of society's full human potential and sustainable development will not be possible if vulnerable members of our societies do not enjoy their full human rights and opportunities. Women and girls, for instance, must enjoy equal access to quality education, economic resources, political participation, as well as equal opportunities for employment, leadership positions, and participation in decision-making at all levels. The promotion and protection of fundamental human rights and fundamental freedoms are critical elements for the achievement of international peace and security and the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It is for this reason that the international community must support the mandate and operations of the Human Rights Council in its quest to strengthen institutions in upholding the human rights of all, especially as it relates to gender equality and women empowerment, as well as the elimination of all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls across the globe. I seize this opportunity to reiterate that Nigeria remains committed to the promotion and protection of human rights devoid of any discrimination, in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Nigeria reaffirms its commitment to work with the Human Rights Council as it vigorously pursues the implementation of its core mandate of promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms worldwide. Mr. Vice President, the fight against terrorism remains a priority for the federal government of Nigeria. In light of the need to ensure respect for human rights and professionalism, President Muhammadu Buhari has committed to the retraining and human rights awareness raising of the Nigerian military in engaging the growing exigencies of security in our country. The President has underscored the point that professionalism and a culture of respect for human rights among the armed forces and other security agencies are essential policy thrusts of the administration in the fight against terrorism, the Boko Haram insurgency, kidnapping, as well as other forms of criminality that have unfortunately bedeviled our country in recent years. In prosecuting the fight against terrorism, Nigeria recognizes the importance of adherence to international human rights obligations. With the establishment of a human rights desk at the headquarters and formations of the armed forces and the inauguration of the Department of Civil-Military Relations, our military and security agencies are continually sensitized on the imperative of respect for human rights while countering terrorism. The Nigerian Army has earned accolades for military aid to civil populace engagements at home and abroad. Furthermore, with the launch of the National Action Plan for Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism, which focuses on building institutions as well as de-radicalization and reintegration programs, a number of repentant Boko Haram fighters have undergone de-radicalization processes and have been reintegrated back into the society. Recent reforms in the judicial sector have also strengthened the rule of law, access to justice and human rights, the right to be protected, enhanced community resilience, sustainable livelihoods, peace to prosperity efforts, and community violence reduction and integrated strategic communication, all to curtail and counter violent extremism. Mr. Vice President, the Northeast Development Commission, which has recently been established, has been empowered through budgetary allocation and relevant institutional structures. Moreover, our policy to ensure post-conflict recovery and build a counter-criminality environment for speedy rehabilitation, reconstruction, and resettlement of victims of terrorism in the Northeast is also being vigorously pursued. In addition, Nigeria has created a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, and Social Development. This is to enable us to respond adequately and expeditiously to humanitarian emergencies in the country. It also affords us the opportunity to interface with other humanitarian actors and engender proper coordination of humanitarian activities and disaster management. Mr. Vice President, there is no doubt that corruption hampers development as it impedes and frustrates the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. My delegation therefore calls for continued international cooperation in the effort to repatriate looted funds stashed in foreign jurisdictions. The availability of these funds will further facilitate the full enjoyment of basic human rights and fundamental freedoms for our citizens and citizens of other countries in the same position. Nigeria, therefore, calls for concerted efforts in combating illicit financial flows. Mr. Vice President, in conclusion, I want to unequivocally state that Nigeria will continue to support the global action for the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda, especially in critical areas of poverty eradication, zero hunger, quality education, and climate change. Nigeria will also continue to promote and effectively defend the fundamental human rights of Nigerians and all others within our borders. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Mr. Joel Hernandez, Commissioner and Vice President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights Organization of the American States. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
La Organización de Estados Americanos, por conducto de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, valora ampliamente la oportunidad de comparecer ante el más alto foro de Naciones Unidas para los Derechos Humanos. Durante las últimas décadas, el continente americano ha experimentado niveles crecientes de incorporación de estándares internacionales de derechos humanos. En los años 80 y 90, un gran número de países de la región fueron protagonistas de una transición de regímenes dictatoriales y conflictos armados internos hacia la democracia. También observamos importantes avances en materia de lucha contra la pobreza y la pobreza extrema, así como la incorporación progresiva de los estándares interamericanos en las legislaciones nacionales. A pesar de este histórico avance, en los últimos años hemos sido testigos de grandes desafíos para los derechos humanos, la democracia y el desarrollo en las Américas. Deseo comentar algunos de los desafíos que observamos el año pasado. Durante 2019, la Comisión observó la persistencia de actos de violencia y discriminación en contra de grupos en situación de especial de exclusión y discriminación, como mujeres y niñas, personas LGBTI, pueblos indígenas, defensoras y defensores de derechos humanos, líderes sociales y periodistas, personas migrantes y personas privadas de la libertad, entre otros grupos en situación de vulnerabilidad. En ese marco, la Comisión también ha observado con preocupación acciones de represión de la protesta social. La respuesta de los Estados frente a los conflictos sociales varían en cada país. Sin embargo, en diversos casos se presentó una tendencia hacia el uso excesivo de la fuerza y a la imposición de restricciones a los derechos a la protesta social, la libertad de asociación y a la libertad de expresión. Con igual preocupación observamos la existencia de actos de violencia y vandalismo. La Comisión Interamericana condena enérgicamente todo acto de violencia independientemente de quien provenga. La Comisión Interamericana recuerda que la protesta es legítima en tanto se desarrolla en forma pacífica. Las amenazas, criminalización, represalias y violencia contra miembros de diversos colectivos históricamente discriminados y en especial para los y las defensoras de derechos humanos se recrudece y agrava en las Américas. La labor de defensa de los derechos humanos, particularmente de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas, comunidades afrodescendientes y campesinas y del derecho a un medio ambiente sano, se traduce en numerosas víctimas fatales en la región. Las falencias que afectan a muchos sistemas de justicia de la región conllevan a que un gran número de estos crímenes queden en la impunidad o la espera de una lenta justicia, perpetuando la violencia y las violaciones al derecho a la vida y a la integridad personal. La Comisión llama a los Estados de la región a tomar medidas concretas, adecuadas y eficaces en materia de protección, prevención, investigación y acceso a la justicia, para crear un ambiente propicio y seguro para quienes defienden los derechos humanos en la región. Por otra parte, durante el 2019, la CIDH ha manifestado su preocupación reiterada por los derechos de las personas migrantes en la región. En particular, nos preocupa la situación de la migración forzada de personas venezolanas, que podría ascender a más de 4.600.000 personas. La Comisión ha observado con suma preocupación las medidas adoptadas por algunos estados para restringir la movilidad y acogida de la población venezolana mediante el establecimiento de una serie de requisitos administrativos o el establecimiento de mayores controles policiales y migratorios en las fronteras. En ese marco se observa que persiste la migración forzada de personas del Triángulo Norte de Centroamérica. Las caravanas en dirección a Estados Unidos a través de México continuaron creando situaciones de riesgo y vulnerabilidad para los migrantes y sus familias. Adicionalmente, en relación con la migración de Nicaragua a Costa Rica, la Comisión reconoció la política de puertas abiertas de este último país. A la vez, observó de cerca las dificultades que enfrentan las personas nicaragüenses que se vieron forzadas a desplazarse como consecuencia de sus opiniones políticas y de las graves violaciones de derechos humanos en el contexto de la crisis que afecta a ese país. La Comisión reitera su llamado a los estados de la región a atender la situación de migración forzada en las Américas, en un marco de responsabilidad compartida, atendiendo las causas subyacentes que la originan y con una respuesta basada en los derechos humanos, garantizando los derechos de las personas migrantes y refugiadas, tales como el derecho a buscar y recibir asilo, no devolución, no discriminación y los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales que los asisten. En el año 2019, la Comisión continuó fortaleciendo el trabajo integrado y coordinado, lo que le permitió responder de manera efectiva e inmediata a las situaciones de derechos humanos que tuvieron lugar en diferentes países de la región. De manera especial, la Comisión atendió las protestas sociales que se dieron en Ecuador, Chile, Bolivia y Haití, cada uno en contextos distintos. Deseo expresar nuestro reconocimiento por la anuencia de las autoridades de esos países para recibir las misiones de la Comisión. Su apertura al escrutinio internacional es una muestra de su vocación democrática. Las recomendaciones formuladas como resultado de esas visitas tienen el propósito de contribuir a los esfuerzos nacionales para fortalecer su marco de protección a los derechos humanos. En ese marco, la Comisión busca contribuir con los países de la región en el cumplimiento de sus obligaciones internacionales y en la implementación de sus recomendaciones a la luz de las normas y estándares interamericanos. En sus 6 décadas de trabajo, la Comisión Interamericana ha impulsado reformas estructurales al interior de los Estados que han fortalecido la vigencia de los derechos humanos en toda la región. Reitero ahora la disposición de la Comisión a seguir cooperando con los Estados y la sociedad civil. Es justo decir que hoy en día prevalecen en las Américas los regímenes democráticos, resultado de los esfuerzos nacionales, sociedad y Estado, y del apoyo brindado por los organismos internacionales y la comunidad internacional. Sin embargo, también es justo afirmar que en la consolidación de nuestras democracias aún quedan importantes tareas pendientes. La realidad del continente americano sigue arrojando un panorama desafiante, con extremas desigualdades sociales, problemas serios de acceso a la justicia, discriminación hacia las mujeres, los pueblos indígenas, los afrodescendientes, los migrantes y a un importante número de la población por su orientación sexual, entre otras situaciones de exclusión y marginalidad. Saldar estas importantes tareas pendientes, es decir, fortalecer la institucionalidad democrática de los Estados y generar impactos concretos en el goce y ejercicio de estos derechos, es posible y depende de la participación de todas y todos nosotros, agentes estatales, organizaciones de la sociedad civil y organismos internacionales. Señor Vicepresidente, hoy en día, este compromiso de la Comisión Interamericana de fortalecer la democracia y el goce y ejercicio de los derechos humanos para las personas habitantes del continente americano continúa y continuará intacto hasta que, tal como lo indica su mandato, cada persona goce plenamente de sus derechos humanos sobre la base de la dignidad humana. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now I have the honor of inviting Her Excellency Madam Omi Asaka, Parliamentary Vice Foreign Minister of Japan. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. It is my great honor to have this opportunity to make a statement at the Human Rights Council on behalf of the Government of Japan. First of all, I would like to make a comment regarding the response to the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, which is an urgent issue in the international community. With regard to the cruise ship Diamond Princess, Japan has been taking measures with maximum consideration for ensuring the health of the passengers and crew of the ship, regardless of their nationality. In cooperation with all countries around the world, including China, Japan will continue to make every effort to prevent the spread of the infection and to converge the situation as soon as possible. In such a situation, allow me to express our distress at the information that some people are being treated unjustly just because they are of East Asian origin. For example, by being suspended from using facilities or by being calumniated. I would like to take this opportunity at the Human Rights Council to ask everyone to ensure that such actions do not occur. Japan has been re-elected as a member of the Human Rights Council for another 3 years. The government of Japan, in collaboration with the international community and civil society, is dedicated to leading international discussion to contribute to the promotion and protection of human rights. Mr. Vice President, Japan is going to host various important international events this year. During those events, we will highlight the importance of human rights in order to facilitate the protection and promotion of human rights throughout the world. Japan places particular importance on women's empowerment, as well as protection and promotion of women's rights. Japan will host the 6th World Assembly for Women, or WOW, this coming April. While last year, High Commissioner Bachelet participated in the 5th WOW, we will also have leading figures from a wide range of fields in the coming WOW. The main theme of the next WOW is based on the He for She, which is the concept that men and women work together to develop a society where gender equality is realized and all people can enjoy comfortable lives. Japan has strongly committed to the rule of law and human rights protection based on it. This April, we will host the 14th United Nations Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, otherwise known as the Kyoto Congress. Through the Kyoto Congress, we stress the importance of the promotion of the rule of law. We are going to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games Tokyo 2020 this summer. This will be the first Olympic and Paralympic Games prepared and operated in accordance with the guiding principles on business and human rights. Through hosting Olympic and Paralympic Games, Japan will promote the awareness of unity and diversity, pursue the realization of a harmonized society where human rights, including the rights of persons with disabilities, are fully respected, and contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. Mr. Vice President, as a member of the Human Rights Council from Asia-Pacific region, Japan stands ready to contribute to improvement of the human rights situation in this region. While this region has enjoyed remarkable economic growth, no one can deny the fact that democratization and protection of fundamental human rights are challenges that still need to be addressed. Fundamental human rights, including freedom of expression, should be secured, and suppression of human rights defenders should be prevented in every country. While each country has its own challenges for improvement of its human rights situation, and the process and pace for improvement may differ from country to country, we believe that every country can share fundamental values and continue moving forward together in the same direction. In this regard, we have attached importance to the communication with other countries. For example, we have held a bilateral human rights dialogue with some countries, including Myanmar. With regard to the alleged human rights violations in Rakhine State, the government of Myanmar announced its position to conduct an investigation into and prosecution of any criminal acts based on the final report of the Independent Commission on Inquiry. Japan strongly expects the smooth progress of such steps and continuously supports Myanmar's own initiatives. The issue of abduction by North Korea is one of our top priority issues. We appreciate that the resolution on the situation of human rights in DPRK has been adopted at the General Assembly for the last 15 years consecutively. Japan, in close cooperation with other countries and international community, continues to strongly urge North Korea to take concrete action towards the early resolution of the abduction issue. Japan also pays attention to human rights situation around the globe. For example, we are concerned with the spread of human rights abuses, such as arbitrary detention in Venezuela. We hope that the activities of the OHCHR and the FFM will contribute to improving the human rights situation in the country. Mr. Vice President, I would like to introduce a couple of our latest initiatives to further protect human rights. Japan has been vigorously taking action to protect and promote children's rights. In this context, Japan is developing a national action plan to end violence against children. In addition, a highly qualified expert from Japan will stand as a candidate in the June election to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. We would appreciate your valuable support for her. Japan has taken initiatives to promote international discussion on the elimination of discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their family members. Japan has been supporting the activities of the Special Rapporteur on this issue and brought about her visit to Japan this month. Japan would like to seek your understanding and support to eliminate discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their family members. This April, Japan will open a national center called Upopoi, which in the Ainu language means singing in a large group. This center is expected to serve as a base to restore and promote the culture of the Ainu people who are indigenous to the northern part of the Japanese archipelago. Japan is the first country in Asia to accept refugees under the resettlement program. We will expand inter alia the annual quota of refugees to be accepted under the resettlement program from this year. Mr. Vice President, the head of the Republic of Korea delegation mentioned the issue of the comfort women yesterday. Japan has been sincerely addressing this issue for a long period of time, including the agreement between Japan and the ROK in December 2015. And the projects based on the agreement have been received positively by many former comfort women. Mr. Vice President, Japan is committed to improving and enhancing the functions of the UN and the HRC. Given the limited amount of human and financial resources and time available, we have to make the international human rights protection mechanism more effective and efficient. Through the opportunity provided by the review of the Human Rights Treaty body to be held this year, and the review of the HLC to be held next year, each country should be proactively consider raising points to be improved towards enhancement of the international human rights protection mechanisms. Japan stands ready to contribute to such discussions, taking our own experience and advice from other countries into consideration. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter. I would like to take this opportunity to recall the Charter and decide to take further initiatives at home and abroad to protect and promote human rights based on the concept of human security. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister of State of the Commonwealth, United Nations and South Asia, and the Special Representative of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, I wish to offer the deepest sympathies on behalf of the Government of the United Kingdom, indeed all the citizens of the United Kingdom, to all those affected by COVID-19 in China and indeed elsewhere. The international community must work together. We must work together to better understand the threat we face and to take the most effective action. The United Kingdom will play our part. Mr. Vice President, 75 years ago, in the aftermath of the most appalling of conflicts, the architects of the UN Charter carved out 3 pillars of cooperation with which we would build a better, a safer, and more equal future. Today, the United Kingdom remains steadfastly committed to working with all of you to maintain peace and security, foster development, and promote and protect human rights, just as the authors of the Charter envisaged. Mr. Vice President, they knew that states that respect human rights create the conditions for societies that are more secure, societies that are more prosperous, societies that are better equipped to meet the needs of their people. And that is why, to this day, respect for human rights remains at the heart, rightly, of the international system. And that is why in 2020 and beyond, the United Kingdom will place the promotion and protection of human rights at the top of our list of international priorities. As a global force for good, we will continue to uphold and defend the international rule of law, the values of liberal democracy, and the rights and freedoms of citizens around the world. As a demonstration of that very commitment to international human rights, the United Kingdom will seek re-election to the Council later this year, and we look forward to your support. As our then Foreign Secretary, now our Prime Minister, said to this very Council in June 2018, we can and we could solve many of the world's most serious problems and achieve virtually every sustainable development goal by 2030. How? If every girl in the world had at least 12 years of quality education. We will strain with every sinew to achieve that very goal, whilst also striving to end sexual violence in conflict and violence against all women and girls. Your Excellencies, Mr. Vice President, we also pledge to stand up for freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion or belief, to protect the rights of persecuted minorities, to defend media freedom, to stand up for journalists and other media workers, and also support other civil society groups that hold the powerful rightly to account. In that regard, I commend to this Council the statement published today by the Media Freedom Coalition, co-chaired by ourselves, the United Kingdom and Canada. The statement outlines the collective intent of coalition members to take action on individual cases and situations of concern, to speak out publicly, and to provide support for those advocating for media freedom. The United Kingdom will also implement a new autonomous human rights sanctions regime to punish those who violate and abuse human rights. And finally, as co-host of this year's crucial UN Climate Summit, COP26, we will strive to raise global ambitions and commitments on tackling climate change and its potential impacts on the enjoyment of human rights. Mr. Vice President, despite the commitment and efforts of many in this chamber, we know that millions of people around the world continue to be deprived of their rights and freedoms. In Syria, human rights continue to be violated and abused every day, with the regime the main perpetrator. We are gravely concerned about the reckless offensive by Syrian and Russian forces in Idlib, in which hospitals, schools, and first responders, innocent civilian lives, have come under attack. Those responsible for these violations of international humanitarian law must be held to account. In Myanmar and Bangladesh, hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims and other ethnic minorities, many who have survived violence, including sexual violence, remain stranded from their homes. It is therefore incumbent the authorities in Myanmar must implement the provisional measures required by the International Court of Justice, together with the recommendations made by the Rakhine Advisory Commission and the Independent Commission of Inquiry. In Iran in November, we saw the most deadly crackdown against internal political dissent since 1979 and a near total shutdown of the internet. Faith groups have also been targeted. We urge the Iranian authorities to release those detained and to respect freedom of expression, freedom of religion or belief. In North Korea, reports of serious and wide-ranging human rights violations continue to emerge. We again call on the North Korean government to work with this Council to address them. And finally, in China, over 1 million Uyghurs have been extrajudicially detained, and there are systematic restrictions on Uyghur culture and the practice of Islam. We call on China to allow the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights unfettered access to the region. Mr. Vice President, there are times, and I'm sure I speak for many in this room and beyond, when the human rights picture across the world looks bleak, when the violations and abuses we see are too heartbreaking, when the challenges for this very Council seem too great. At such times, if we ever doubt our ability to achieve our goals, our collective goals, we must remember all that we have achieved together over the last 75 years, from the bleakest and darkest of beginnings. Together, we have built a human rights framework based on the principle that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, a system that can hold perpetrators of the worst human rights violations and abuses to account. And importantly, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a system that can support governments across the world to improve their own human rights record. So, in the face of every new challenge, we should not lose heart. We should recognize the great value of this very Council and the wider human rights system, and encourage all states to engage openly with it. And above all else, we should remember that there are countless individuals, millions of people around the world, whose rights and freedoms are being violated and abused every single day. The world's most vulnerable people. And what do they hope for? Who do they rely upon? This very Council, to ensure their voice is heard, their suffering is exposed. So, Your Excellencies, by working together in this chamber and beyond, I am confident we will ensure that they, these most vulnerable of people, persecuted individuals around the world, and others, can be provided the hope they need, that ultimately they too can enjoy their human rights, that they too can live in the safety and freedom, and they too can contribute to the well-being and prosperity of their country and the wider world. That is surely, ultimately, a goal that we should all continue to fight for, to strive for. And let me assure you of this: my country, the United Kingdom, is committed to doing just that. Not just for today, not just for tomorrow, but into the future. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to those vulnerable countless millions out there, and we owe it to our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Maintenant, j'ai l'honneur de donner la parole à Son Excellent Monsieur Mohamed Al-Hassan Bouharis, commissaire aux droits de l'homme et l'action humanitaire de la Mauritanie. You have the floor.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على النبي الكريم. سيد نائب رئيس مجلس حقوق الإنسان الموقر، أيها السادة، أيها السيدات، اسمحوا لي في البداية أن أتقدم بخالص التهاني والتبريكات للسيدة إليزابيث تيشي، السفيرة المندوبة الدائمة لنمسا، بمناسبة اختيارها رئيسة للمجلس، وأعبر لها عن كامل استعدادنا للتعاون لإنجاح مهمتها. كما أغتنم هذه المناسبة ليقدم أحر التهاني لمفوضة السامية للحقوق الإنسان السيدة ميشيل باشلي على العمل المتميز والدؤوب الذي يقوم به فريقها خدمة لترقية وحماية حقوق الإنسان على المستوى العالمي. سيد الرئيس، أيها السادة، أيها السيدات، لا يزال عالمنا يواجه تحديات جسيمة تحول دون تمتع الإنسان بأبسط حقوقه الأساسية والضرورية، ومن بين تلك التحديات النزاعات المسلحة والإرهاب وتدهور البيئة انشار الفساد والاستغلال البشري إلى غير ذلك من التحديات التي يجب على المنظومة الدولية التحدي لها بكل عزم وصرامة. وتقوم بلادي في هذا الإطار بجهود متنوعة على مستويين الدولي والإقليمي للمساهمة في حل النزاعات واستقبال النازحين ورفع التحديات عن طريق سياسات متنوعة ومقاربة أمنية شاملة للتصدي للإرهاب والتطرف والجريمة المنظمة العابرة للحدود، وفي إطار مجموعة الدول الساحل الخمسة. سيد الرئيس، أيها السادة، أيها السيدات، لقد عرفت حالة حقوق الإنسان في بلادي بعد التناوب الديمقراطي الذي حصل في شهر أغسطس 2019 نقلة نوعية في مجال ترقية وحماية حقوق الإنسان واعتماد نهج جديد قوامه إعلاء قيم المواطنة والانفتاح على جميع الشركاء والفاعلين بغض النظر عن انتماءاتهم وولاءاتهم. وتشكل هذه الرؤية بوصلة للجهود المتنوعة الرامية إلى ترسيخ اللحمة الوطنية من خلال القيام بكل ما يلزم للقضاء على كل أشكال الغبن والتفاوت، وهو ما تجسد على سبيل المثال لا للحصر في إنشاء المندوبة العامة التآزر للتضامن الوطني ومكافحة الإقصاء بغلاف مالي يربو على $500 مليار، وإطلاق مشروع أولي لتعزيز القدرة الشرائية وتحسين الظروف المعيشية للسكان بتمويل يقدر $115 مليون لسنة 2020. يأتي ذلك بعد العمل على خلق مناخ سياسي هادئ حرصا على إرساء إطار للتشاور يمكن من تفعيل مؤسسة المعارضة الديمقراطية واستشار قاعدة الأحزاب السياسية بشأن القضايا الاستراتيجية ضمن علاقات احترام متبادلة بين الأطراف والسعي المتواصل لإيجاد توافق حول القضايا الوطنية الكبرى مع احترام وجهات النظر مهما اختلفت معها، ولن يثنينا عن هذا التوجه تعمد تشويه واقع حقوق الإنسان في بلادنا القائم على المساواة واحترام الحريات وإشراك الجميع في تسيير شؤون بلادهم دون إقصاء أو تمييز. سيد الرئيس، أيها السادة، أيها السيدات، تعتبر بلادنا طرفا في كافة الاتفاقيات والمعاهدات الدولية والإقليمية الرئيسية في مجال حقوق الإنسان، كما ترتبط بلادنا بعلاقات وثيقة بلجان المتابعة تنفيذ المعاهدات من خلال التعاطي الإيجابي مع مختلف اللجان الأممية والإفريقية والعربية، وذلك عبر تقديم التقارير الدورية أمامها بصفة منتظمة. وفي نفس السياق وسعيا للوفاء بالتزاماتنا الدولية في مجال حقوق الإنسان، بادرنا إلى وضع وتنفيذ خطة العمل الوطنية المتعلقة بالتوصيات الصادرة عن الجولة الثانية للاستعراض الدولي الشامل. وقد قمنا في أكتوبر الماضي بتقييم مرحلي تشاركي لهذه الخطة أظهر تقدما كبيرا في تنفيذها، ونعكف حاليا على التحضير للجولة الثالثة لبلادنا المقررة نوفمبر العام الجاري. كما أنهينا العمل على وضع خطة العمل الوطنية للقضاء على الاتجار بالأشخاص، ويجري العمل على وضع استراتيجية وطنية شاملة لترقية وحماية حقوق الإنسان. وسنعمل قريبا على تحيين الاستراتيجية الوطنية لتوطيد اللحمة الاجتماعية من جهة، وتعزيز الإطار القانوني لحماية حقوق الإنسان من جهة أخرى، باستصدار قوانين تتعلق بمحاربة الإتجار بالبشر وتهريب المهاجرين وحماية العنف ضد النساء والفتيات، ووضع إطار قانوني جديد لمنظمات المجتمع المدني يلائم متطلبات هذا الفضاء الحيوي. سيد الرئيس، أيها السادة، أيها السيدات، إن حكومة موريتانيا تؤكد على تمسكها بالتزاماتها الدولية في مجال حقوق الإنسان باستعدادها الدائم للتعاطي الإيجابي والفعال مع جميع الآليات الأممية. كما نتطلع إلى المزيد من التعاون من خلال تبادل التجارب والخبرات ما بين مؤسستنا الوطنية المختصة واللجان الأممية، خاصة مفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان. في الأخير يؤكد وفد بلادي على انخراطه طيلة فترة ولايته بالمجلس في الجهود الهادفة إلى تعزيز حقوق الإنسان وحمايتها والمضي قدما في تنفيذ ولاية مجلسنا النبيلة. أشكركم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا جزيلا معالي الوزير. Now I have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Jane Bagel, Director General of the International Development Law Organization. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is an honor to address this Council as the Director General of the International Development Law Organization. IDLO is the only international intergovernmental organization dedicated exclusively to the promotion of human rights, peace, and sustainable development through the rule of law. I should like to thank High Commissioner Bachelet and her team for their important work and for the vision that she has expressed for the rule of law and justice as an essential foundation for the realization of human rights. As many speakers have noted, human rights are under pressure in many parts of the world, and the rule of law is being eroded. Yet now is the time to realize the potential power of the rule of law to advance human rights, justice, and human dignity. As the Secretary General stressed in his call to action, a human rights-based approach oriented around peaceful and just societies and respect for the rule of law delivers development that is more lasting and inclusive. For this reason, full implementation of SDG 16 on peace, justice, and accountable institutions is vital for the protection of human rights and the realization of the entire 2030 agenda. IDLO employs a dual approach in its work in all regions of the world, including in some of the poorest and most fragile countries, as well as in middle-income countries. We work from the top down with governments to strengthen laws and institutions, helping to make them more effective, accessible, and accountable, to fight corruption and discrimination, and to build judicial independence and legal capacity. At the same time, IDLO works from the bottom up to empower citizens to access justice and claim their rights, to build trust between justice providers and seekers, and to promote inclusive policy making. For example, in Mali, dialogue between civil society and state actors has been facilitated to strengthen the criminal justice chain, contributing to peace-building efforts in the country. IDLO is now expanding this approach more broadly in the Sahel region. In Tunisia, IDLO supports capacity building for judges and other justice professionals in commercial and economic law, thereby helping to promote economic rights and sustainable development. In Afghanistan, IDLO has worked with the Attorney General's Office to establish specialized units to investigate and prosecute gender-based violence, as well as providing legal support to a network of shelters for victims. Our experience shows that national ownership is key to effective institution building. For this reason, IDLO is respectful of different legal systems, operating under the principle of legal pluralism while upholding international human rights standards. While much has been achieved, much remains to be done to mobilize political commitment and financial investment at the scale required. According to a recent report, over 2/3 of the world's population do not have meaningful access to justice. At the same time, official development assistance in the justice sector has been declining. In particular, after 25 years of mixed progress in implementing the Beijing Platform for Action, we must close the justice gap for women and girls as a matter of urgency and tackle the multiple and overlapping layers of legal, economic, social, and cultural discrimination. Rule of law and justice systems are among the best investments that can be made to enable peace, human rights, and sustainable development. Globally, the demand for rule of law and justice is high and growing, but the supply is not keeping up. We believe that the justice sector deserves the same attention as other critical sectors in terms of ambition and scale, and both domestic and international financing. To help build coalitions for action around the rule of law, IDLO, together with the Government of Italy and the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, has launched an annual conference on SDG 16. Last year, the results contributed to the review of SDG 16 at the high-level political forum. This year, as we enter the decade of action to deliver the SDGs, the conference will be held in Rome in June on the theme of accelerating SDG 16 implementation through transformative governance. Mr. Vice President, my organization welcomes this Council's increasing focus on the rule of law, including dedicating the next forum on human rights, democracy, and rule of law to access to justice for all. In helping to mobilize greater investment in and action on the rule of law and access to justice, the Council can accelerate progress towards the peaceful, inclusive, and just societies envisaged in Goal 16 and help build a concrete pathway to the entire Sustainable Development Agenda. IDLO stands ready to support the Council to strengthen the rule of law in the service of human rights and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this was the last speaker in our list today. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. to continue high-level segment followed by the general segment. I hereby close the 6th meeting of the 43rd session of the Human Rights Council. The meeting is closed.
Thank you, Ambassador.